So last time we were talking about the credibility of information in this information age. Particularly, we left off talking about the news media and the difficulty determining whether the information we get is credible. Last time I talked about how back when I was a kid, we only had 3 major network newscasts in the evening: ABC, NBC, and CBS, and they provided the news for the country. And now we have news nonstop, 24/7, on several cable channels. And as you can tell now, these news programs deliver the news from different perspectives. And if you look at Fox, you'll get one perspective. You look at MSNBC, you get another. And I, for a long time, I'm kind of a news junkie, and I would record at least 2 of the national news broadcasts like ABC or NBC just to compare. And you could actually tell the difference between NBC, ABC, and CBS. Has anybody detected a slant just between those 3? And it changes as they get new anchors and everything. The editors are changed. But for the longest time, CBS was a little bit further to the left than either ABC or NBC. And for a while, when Peter Jennings was there, ABC was a little bit conservative. But you can actually tell the difference just between those 3. You broaden it to all of the stuff on cable. You got really different viewpoints out there now. And the authors of our textbook talk about how the slant of the news could be influenced by the fact that these news networks are owned by multinational corporations. And many of the issues that we address on the news relate to these multinational corporations, like the fact that GE didn't pay any taxes last year. GE used to own NBC. GE owned NBC when NBC covered that story. And that story was covered very differently on NBC than it was on the other network news channels. And if you can detect that, the obvious ones, then what about all of the stories that had a slanted presentation that you couldn't detect? Some corporate CEO at GE, Disney, decides, I don't like that story because it undercuts my ability to make massive profit. So it's not going to air. And there are several examples of this kind of thing happening. Even one in Florida, where I was born and raised, this one local news channel that was a Fox affiliate wanted to do this story about how genetically enhanced milk causes problems in the people, particularly children. And the corporate executives wouldn't allow them to do the broadcast. And they actually went into a suit and everything. And these corporate executives, they determine essentially what gets on the air. And that, has a broad influence on what we are given in terms of news. Also, the government manages the news in many different ways. And our authors talk about an example in 2007. This is after the Katrina hits down in the coast, and FEMA gives a quote press conference in 2007. No, is this before or after Katrina? It's after, yeah. And they're trying to look good, given that they haven't looked very good in the handling of this catastrophe. And they hold this quote press conference that had no press. It was just them interviewing themselves. and they were asking their own questions, which tended to look make it look good. And for the longest time, they didn't tell anybody that this was essentially a fake press conference in which they interviewed themselves and asked their own questions. Pretty freaky. Comes out that in 2005, the Health and Human Resources Department paid for positive news coverage. Paid people to write, a good thing about what, I think they were doing a drug benefit program back then. And they actually paid people to say good things about it and to go on these news, network news, cable news channels and say good things about what the government is doing. Yes, sir?
All like the major news networks, they're all part of like special interest groups like Council on Foreign Relations, like Bilderberg. All these groups have like push policy, and they're supposed to be reporting policy, but they're a part of it from the inside. Like you said, the government, has a hand in. That's like above the government. Those special interest groups run the government, so it's like they're in bed with the people that are above the government. It's kind of creepy.
It is. It is. Who's in charge? Who is in charge? And, it's really coming out now, I think, with this Buffett rule thing. That really hits at the heart of the issue. Have you heard about this Buffett rule thing? Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, has complained, and he wrote an op-ed in the New York Times saying that I pay a lower rate on my taxes than my secretary.
Yes.
This is not fair, it's disgusting, and my friends have had such an influence on the legislature that this fact is still in place right now. Warren Buffett's secretary pays less on taxes than Warren Buffett. And here's why.
Warren.
What's that?
Warren. She pays more taxes.
Excuse me, a higher rate on taxes. To be more specific, Warren Buffett is going to pay more on his taxes than his secretary. But he's going to pay at a lower rate. His secretary is going to pay a higher rate. For Warren Buffett and others, that seems unfair. And here's why. Right now, we pay a certain rate of income tax on our income. And depending on how much you make, this rate is in the 20s, 25, 26. And then we pay another rate on our investments. And this rate is much lower. It's like 12 to 14. And most rich people, particularly Warren Buffett, they're going to make more on their investments than they do on income. So the majority of their income is going to be taxed at this lower rate for investments. And as a result, Warren Buffett and many of the hedge fund managers are actually going to pay a lower rate on their taxes than their secretaries. Now, Warren Buffett has argued that this should be changed, and President Obama has suggested a Buffett rule in his jobs program as a way to pay for it. He wants to rule in place that'll make it such that people who are wealthy will never pay a lower rate than what we pay on our taxes. However low it goes, it'll stay up to where the middle class is paid. So at the very least, the wealthy will pay the same rate as the middle class. Now what's so interesting about this is right now, 75% of the public agrees with it. 66% of Republicans agree with the Buffett rule. Yet anybody who comes on the multinationally owned network news broadcast does intellectual backflips not to agree with it. It is amazing. Mitt Romney was just on the Morning Joe yesterday. He was just asked a direct question about that. And his answer was, wall, 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 wall. I don't want to slow down economic growth. Yeah.
He called them
Job creators, exactly, yeah. It is breathtaking, It is truly breathtaking. And I got, job creators. Many would argue that what you have here, and we talked about supply side and demand side, when you refer to rich people as job creators, you're taking that supply side approach, and you want to make it easier for them to create jobs. But the other half of the economic discipline is, advocates this demand side approach. And their view would be that people with a job are job creators. because they create the demand that enables people to sell products. So rather than cutting taxes on rich people, we should be trying to get poor people jobs, and that'll create more demand out there. Well, anyway, I bring this up to illustrate, the corporate influence as well as the governmental influence on the news. What we hear on the network news is the product of many different influences, and two of them are the multinational corporations and the government.
How can you get corporate, like, people to get jobs if the corporations won't invest in America? Because they're investing overseas, is it like jobs don't just pop up? If they're looking at the bottom and start like, all right, get jobs, like they're getting jobs, they're trying. Still we get a job, still we get a job. We don't produce anything. That's the big thing we're trying to crack right now, and it's interesting that you mentioned that, because just I forget yesterday or the day before, a few people were making the point that China is actually making a better case for our corporations than we are. Lower tax rate, lower rate for labor. If you can put up with the smog and never seeing the sun, China would be the place to take your business, because you could make more profit there. And that's one of the issues. So our news is controlled by many different influences. During the Iraq and Afghanistan war, the government prevented any pictures of the dead coming back. And this was to kind of monitor the public support for the war. During the Vietnam War in the late 60s, there was all kinds of footage of this war on the national news and on broadcast television. And it really turned a lot of people off from the war. You can imagine sitting down for supper with your parents, and you get the body count, for the week in Vietnam, and maybe you have an uncle there. How does that change the discussion over dinner, However, many argue that during the Afghanistan and the Iraq war, we haven't really been paying attention. Yes, sir.
I was just gonna say, it's crazy how, that government thing, for example, I watch Al Jazeera, which is owned by the Emir from Qatar, and their perspective, their side is, for example, when they talk about the war in Iraq and stuff, is they're the first channel that I've ever heard on the 9/11 anniversary that say there's this other side that people don't know here in America, that, like, for example, 200,000 people died just a result of that invasion, and they never talk about that here. But I think from their perspective, they want to make that point clear, that they're on the side of this thing that America has invaded, where here it's more we're going there for freedom. So I think it's just it's not here only, it's just everywhere in the world where government or corporation have power and money, they can just spend the news or the message the way they want.
Excellent point. When we get the news about the war in Iraq, we'll get the body count for our soldiers, and often we don't hear even the other side. And often there are more innocent and soldiers who are casualties and killed, and we don't even hear the numbers. It's like we don't even care, really.
When the Europeans were like dividing up Africa and everything, they were calling it, we're going to make these people civilized and educate all the, whatever. Now we're calling it spreading democracy.
Spreading democracy.
Yeah.
And a little Christianity, well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Remember those Korean, like the team of like 14 Koreans that went right when the war started, went to Afghanistan trying to convert people, and they surprisingly got kidnapped.
Go figure.
Like right when the war started, everyone was seeing some Koreans walking around.
Just convert these people.
I think that's I've always thought that was offensive. They only show American soldiers death toll. I'm not concerned only with the soldiers. I want to see all of the kills. I want to see the civilian death toll first.
You might be in the minority in this country.
Right.
There are people who don't care about the other side.
Well, that's partly because the media is devaluing the life of your average child in Iraq.
Let me give you an example. Recently, Christian Amanpour took over ABC's show on Sunday morning this week on ABC. It had been run by George Stephanopoulos, and he's on his way to be the next anchor for ABC. And that's why I think he's working on the morning show to work his way up to the anchor desk. Christian Amanpour takes over this very important political discussion show on Sunday morning. I think their numbers are right behind NBC Meet the Press. And when Christiane Amanpour takes over, she's, number one, a woman, and she is of Middle Eastern descent. And the show immediately begins to take on a kind of international flavor. We have people from the Middle East talking about the Middle East rather
With a
than...
British accent.
What's that?
With a British accent.
Yeah, instead of getting some white guys over here to say what's going on over there, she actually talks to people over there. And like she interviewed Jose Mubarak while he was under siege. She gets unique access. But at the end of the broadcast, they always remember those who have died in their in memoriam. And they talk about the popular people in culture who have died. But then they end the segment with the soldiers that have died over the week. And Christiane Amanpour changed what she says at that point to say that, and we remember the dead in battle over this past week. And she didn't specify, we remember the U.S. soldiers who had died. And many conservatives wrote in complaining, saying that it appeared as if she was recognizing the dead on both sides. And they were just ticked off about that. And to her credit, I believe she stuck to her guns, and she still says it the same way. But even a perceived effort to commemorate the dead of the opposing side, there will be people in our country who complain. It is a pretty freaky place. But hey, you've heard the Republican debates. Sounds like there's a crowd from the Gong Show or something out there, when they talk about how many people Rick Perry had put to death. They're clapping out there, so it's pretty freaky. Yeah.
2 points. Just on the Buffett thing. I mean, clearly, Romney's only created about. He's only worried about his own job creation as president. I think it's brilliant if Obama can find a way to make the rich fight for the rights of the lower class. Then they would be actually using their weight for something worthwhile. And did you hear what Sarah Palin said about Kane?
Not specific.
I think Kane just jumped up in polls.
I heard that she
compared to
forgot
Biden.
his name, called Herbert.
She called him Herb King.
Herb King.
Someone else. She said something really flippant. It was like flavor of the week or something.
Correct. Yeah, I heard that.
She said that he's like I don't know. It was it was really awful.
Nice to see she's become an eloquent pundit.
No, she was. I think she showed like overt racism with her comments.
Apps, I can definitely see that. Yes, sir.
On the Iraq-Afghanistan thing, I just had a quick opinion. Like, since we're already there, like I've been there and I've seen like the help. Like America has actually helped a lot. Like, but they could have done more. It's been corrupted. Like the water that should have trickled all the way down. Like, not all of it got there, right? Like all the contracts, everything's really messy. And it's like small things that, like, if we could get like a hold of like some senators or something like that, just talk like one time we were like handing out bouncy balls to kids. Like I had to like give a starving kid bouncy balls, and they're like, where do I bounce? Like, they didn't know what it was, like, and like soccer balls. We were giving them soccer balls, and they're like starving, and they're like, this kid was like, hey, do you have any paper on you? I was like, what do you mean, like notebook? He's like, yeah. And he showed me his notebook, and he had written on the cover, like on the inside of the cover, on every line, in the smallest like writing.
Wow.
On the smallest writing. It made me realize, like, dang, like
paper.
Think of how much paper we have. We just like rip
Just
it out.
throwing it out, yeah.
And this kid has every inch of his notebook covered in in writing. And he was like, I want to be a doctor. This and this and this and this. And yeah, it's like really sad. And then we're giving
Paper.
bouncy balls. He was like, yeah, do you have any paper?
Wow.
Yeah.
We should do something about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's really simple. If we're giving like bouncy balls, you can do something else. You can just replace it. Food.
Yeah. We got one club that is designated to getting funding to give to people less fortunate. That's what the whole club does. And I think they're still looking for an advisor at this point. But it would, boy, a little bit can go a long way.
Yeah.
Give that guy one sheet of paper, last him a year.
Oh yeah, it'll really work on it.
All right, well, let me take it a little further here. In the book, the authors go on to talk about what we can perceive as the political bias in the news media. And this, of course, is going to depend on your perspective. On the conservative side, there are many who are going to argue, like Sarah Palin, she'll call it the lamestream media. The lamestream media is liberal in its bias, according to Sarah Palin and to her colleagues at Fox, for example. And even Fox News itself, one of their anchors was interviewed, and, well, no, one of their anchors was talking with Jon Stewart, and Jon Stewart was trying to get him to admit that his network wasn't quite fair and balanced. And one of the anchors, Chris Wallace, admitted that Fox News wants to provide the other side. The rest of the news tries to be this, and Fox wants to give the conservative part of the story that hasn't been represented there.
Isn't that biased too?
You think, and Jon Stewart jumped all over it, and on his broadcast he shows a quote of it and says, exactly, that's my point. You guys are intentionally providing this other side of the picture. And Chris Wallace gave an example. He said that after Katrina, the, quote, lamestream media, end quote, was blaming the administration on the poor handling of FEMA and everything. And what were they doing at Fox? They were looking at the Democratic governor and all the Democrats in Louisiana and what a poor job they were doing, providing the other side. So in a way, there's an admission there, but it depends on your perspective. If you're conservative, the media is going to appear to be liberal in its bias. If, however, you are liberal, and maybe more liberal than others, you're going to see the news as being controlled by corporations. And the entire slant of the news is going to be moved to the right as a result of that corporate influence. And these who believe that the media is controlled by corporations will suggest that the fact that rich people are paying a lower rate on their income taxes right now than the secretaries is in fact a product of the corporate bias in the media. And so it depends on your political perspective where the news is going to be, what slant you're going to perceive in the news. Now, according to the authors of our text, ABC, NBC, CBS, PBS, NPR are going to provide you a generally reliable information through the news. Generally reliable
NPR
information.
sometimes very tired.
What's that?
NPR is sometimes very black, I think.
And you'll notice that CNN, MSNBC, and Fox are not even mentioned. So, that, once again, I think might be in the eye of the beholder a bit. However, there is, in traditional journalistic schools, this general belief in objectivity, whereby when you're doing a story, you're going to make an effort to get the one side and the other, and present both faithfully. And you could, in a way, see these networks as all trying to do some version of that. Now, many will argue that that's in itself an illusion. Just because I, have an issue and I put two people on either side, that does not mean that I have presented objective truth there. What, say I have one side over here wants reason and justice, and then I have an axe murderer over here. Do I present two sides and objectivity? No, So many would question that ideal of objectivity itself, but you might see that ideal as being the focus of these network newscasts. These networks, for example, are not trying to provide the other side. They are trying to provide both sides.
I would question spineless liberal punching bags of Fox News.
Oh,
these
yeah.
these cowered over little dweebs who just
What was,
this and then
The guy for Hannity.
Yeah, Combs.
Combs. His beat on Combs, right? He finally quit.
Man, he took a beating.
Yeah,
He just sat
and that
there,
was like his job,
Yeah.
to politely take a beating regularly.
But he must have been like a modern conservative or something to be on that show,
And a kind of sadomasochist.
Pretty easy job. They say yes, he says no. They say
Yeah.
no, he says yes.
And here's why, if I could squeeze in a word, no, okay, thank you. Yeah.
That's why I don't want to send my kids to school. I just want to keep them home.
What's that?
That's why I'm not going to send my kids to school. Like I grew up
Keeping
thinking,
them
I grew up
home
thinking Henry Kissinger was a good guy. Like that's disgusting.
Well,
Like what's that thing? Whenever like the settlers were going out west.
Manifest Destiny.
Yeah, Manifest Destiny. That was like taught to us being a good thing. Like they went and like killed millions of Indians. I don't know, millions, a lot of Indians killed their like environment, and that was like God's right for the settlers.
That's why I quit tutoring social studies. It about makes me vomit.
Yeah.
What you teach these kids, and it really just enforces our role in history and makes us seem exceptional. And we don't tell, the dirt. Anybody hear about what we did to Chief Osceola of the Seminole Indians in Florida? I'm from Florida. I finished up at Florida State, the home of the fighting Seminoles. And
another Indian sports team.
yeah. And in fact, we have Chief Osceola come out at the beginning of the game, and it's really cool, I gotta admit, on a horse. And I forget the horse's name, but with a flaming spear at the beginning of the game, come out to midfield, get the horse to kick up, throw the spear down, and run on. Hell yeah. Very cool. Very cool. But in history, what we did to these Indians is unbelievable. We wanted to get them out of Florida when we had the 13 colonies. We kept sending soldiers down, and the Seminole Indians would kill them. And then finally, Colonel Jessup, took Chief Osceola. He was under the white flag of truce. He comes to negotiate with Colonel Jessup, and Colonel Jessup takes him hostage under the white flag of truce. Now, the white flag of truce is when you have a cessation of the violence so that the leaders can come forward and negotiate. And there's this sacred pact that when there's a white flag of truce, you allow the leader come forward and to leave without any violence. And we betrayed that trust by taking him hostage under the white flag of truce. And for the rest of his life, Colonel Jessup had to defend himself about that disgusting act. And you never hear anything about that in the social studies books.
What did they kill him?
He eventually contracted an illness while he was in jail. Otherwise, he would have probably escaped with his companions. Yes, sir.
Do some of these corporations have rights over these books that are written? Because like you said, you'll read a social studies book that says Manifest Destiny is the best thing ever, and then you'll read the same social studies book but from a different publisher that says
Well, right now, a lot of conservatives are having a great influence over the books that are used in education. Particularly in Texas is where we've heard this influence. And apparently Texas has a great influence over the rest of the country because they have a lot of schools or something.
They're like the standard for what should be taught.
Which is crazy.
Texas is making our
Texas.
schools.
Yeah.
That's terrifying. That's why we're dumbing down the country. That's why we're
And students come into college knowing nothing about a labor union, why they were ever created, what they've ever done, and well, they essentially think that school is about training you to be a good worker at a corporation, rather than a good citizen who knows how to vote. Yes, ma'am?
I was just gonna say I'm currently taking U.S. history, and pertaining to like the Native Americans and everything. In every single battle where we kill the Indians, it's the Battle of, or the War of whatever. In every case where American soldiers were killed or settlers were killed, it's the massacre of, the way.
Interesting how much can be conveyed in just a term. And I remember when I was tutoring that they talked about the end of the Spanish-American War being a compromise, where they gave up half their country to us.
2 of their countries.
It was like a compromise, my goodness. So you're absolutely right. There is a slant to the history that we teach our kids, and that influences the way we go ahead and vote right now, obviously. Yes, sir.
Can you think of anything at all that was good about Columbus? Anything. He was a schmuck, He was a jerk.
He comes over to discover that people are already here.
Someone else would have gotten a vote sooner or later, and brought smallpox and death and slavery and subjugation. But what's so special about this one guy?
Yeah, that's pretty gross.
You're welcome.
So we get District of Columbia, we get the
Columbus
country
Day.
of Columbia, the Columbus Day.
Now, another focus in the news is that they want viewers, and they are competing every day. Nielsen polls come out, and Rachel gets so much, Hannity gets so much, and every night they see these numbers, and advertisers see these numbers, and the amount of money they pay to advertise during these shows is related to the number of viewers. So it is very, very competitive.
Glenn Beck is has the highest rating, highest views out of all
Where's that guy?
people.
And that's a great point. Glenn Beck is no longer
It's
with
funny
us.
because he's the craziest guy and says the most craziest things. Because I'll watch I don't even listen to the news. I think it's all BS.
Well, you
but I'll
haven't
watch
seen
it.
in a while, right?
Yeah.
He actually, I think the way they do it is he actually has a lot of valid points, but since it's coming from Glenn Beck's mouth, they want to turn people off. Like he'll talk about the Constitution and all these the federal
Esoteric
reserve.
stuff.
Like I said, there's a big big punch bowl, nice punch. If there's one turd in it, no one wants to drink the punch.
Well, this actually makes my point, because Glenn Beck is no longer on the air.
Yeah.
His ratings began to plummet, and he got a lot of bad press, and so he's history. And that's a sign to all those other people who have shows, that if you let your numbers drop and you get some bad press, see ya. So, as a result, they are looking at these numbers. And if I do something last night that makes my numbers go up, I'm going to do more of it tomorrow. And often, what gets our attention is stupid news. Yeah, let's look at these bear cubs playing in the street. Do you see the bear cubs? Aren't they cute? Oh, we got more footage on the website. You can go check it out. And the news ends up being about cuddly baloney that just makes you interested in watching. Meanwhile, people are dying, there's diseases spreading, and there's a storm tracker out there, but we're not paying attention to that. Yes, sir.
I think it just came to a point where entertainment is so. For example, I'll take you to Bill O'Reilly and Anderson Cooper. They have now, Bill O'Reilly talks about that rappers, he takes rappers' songs and stuff like that, and he's trying to decipher what do they mean.
Oh, that's funny.
in the contextual
That's just
way.
funny. Bill O'Reilly talking about rap
And
music.
Anderson Cooper has this thing called ridiculous,
Ridiculous.
and he just completely goes out of his way to talk about something that's just ridiculous for him. And he'll talk about
Pop culture
actors,
stuff.
pop culture, and where he's very good at hard news and it's asking hard questions, but he has to do that segment because he knows people's attention span when you talk about something serious is just very. Where when you talk about snooking, it just gets you, higher ratings.
More stupidity. Anderson, can you work in more stupid stuff? I think that really works for you.
You know, so like in the news, they're always putting like using the word war on terror, war on drugs, war on obesity, war on like everything. Like, why do they keep like? There's a reason they're doing that. Like war on everything.
We need a war
They
on
want to get
war.
us numb to war. So when there's like a war in Texas or a war in like New Hampshire, we're just like, oh, it's just a war.
And you
Another
know,
one of those wars.
think about that. Do any of you remember the last time we were not at war?
Yeah. Like 2001.
We were fighting the war on drugs then.
Oh, okay, so
We got many wars going on.
More on jokes like.
Yeah,
Right. And you know, interesting about that, this month, I highly recommend, there's a documentary series being done by Ken Burns on Prohibition. And Ken Burns is the guy who does all those documentaries on baseball, jazz, and everything. Does a really good job. And he has focused on Prohibition because well, it's uniquely American, and it gave rise to the games. It took all this money that was being made with liquor, and during the 20s they made liquor illegal. So all that money went to the gangs, who now did it in an illegal way and made a lot of money from it. And gee, I wonder if there's a correlation to something going on now.
perhaps.
You know, and if we, I heard one in California, I think they're trying to measure what would happen to tax revenue if they legalized and taxed marijuana. And, you know, they could think about taking care of their deficit in California pretty quick.
Marijuana is classified as the same level of drug as like cocaine, heroin.
Cocaine's
I guess-
classified less.
Yeah. Cocaine. Oh yeah, that's what it was. Less.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was interesting, Louis Armstrong, the famous jazz trumpeter, said that he remembers during the 20s when it was actually legal to smoke marijuana, but you couldn't have a drink at that time. So alcohol was illegal. And it's funny how things change. Now,
Way to get blacks and browns in jail.
perhaps. Meanwhile, white males are drinking their vodka and tonic, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you can't underestimate the influence of. Initially, it was like logging companies, paper companies, and especially the tobacco companies. They have a perfect product. You make a cigarette for a penny, you sell it for $1, and it's addictive. That's why they sell.
Absolutely.
They want to corner that market.
And to get an idea of the corporate influence over popular culture and information, remember what the cigarette industry tried to do to the connection between smoking and cancer. They went over and above the call of duty to try to create some disagreement about whether smoking leads to cancer. And one of Al Gore's recent documentaries, he had this clip of a cigarette commercial from the 50s, and you have two actors playing doctors, and they actually, every excuse they have to call each other doctor, they're going to call each other doctor. Doctor, you want a cigarette? Yeah, thank you, doctor. Okay, thank you, doctor. And it was all just to give you the false impression that, this smoking does not lead to cancer. And it actually worked for a long time, For a long time, people continued to smoke. Well, many are arguing that oil companies are doing the same thing right now with respect to the connection between carbon emissions and climate change. And they're going to try to create doubt because they're making billions of dollars off getting us to use oil. And when they make money off something, they don't want it to change.
I love those action commercial, Exxon Mobil. Those
You love
commercials where, no, I said I love
I
this
know, I know.
sarcastic, where there's this scientist who's trying to say, there's this thing called gas thing, and we discovered the thing, and it's for the better future of America. And it's
Fracking is what they're talking about, and
What
it's
the frack?
getting gas by. Be careful here. But they pump water and toxic substances under the ground to release this gas, and it is actually corrupted the groundwater in many communities to such a point that on one documentary called Gasland, this guy, where they've been fracking under his property, he was actually able to light the water coming out of his faucet. Poof! There's actually so much gas in the groundwater at that point. So that guy from Exxon comes on, can we do fracking safely? The answer is yes. And here's why. We do fracking under here. And they show, and there's a lot of space up to where the groundwater is, and they have the camera pan a long time, way up there, And they create this feeling that, we can do this safely. Why? Because we can make billions of dollars doing it. That's why. And as a result of the billions of dollars we make doing it, we can spend millions on these stupid commercials, and we can keep running them day after day after day. Now, how many of those commercials do you see for wind power? How many of those commercials do you see for solar power? None. Why? Because those aren't established corporations that have billions of dollars behind them. Those startup companies don't have that same competitive ability. But the oil and gas industry has so much money that they can actually pool it together and run those commercials nonstop. That one blonde who comes out from the oil and gas industry, she's on every day. She's got a career of pumping more gas. Yes, sir?
I don't think all this corruption will never end, because I was just thinking about I think you're talking about the tobacco guys and making the cigarettes so cheap and selling it so expensive. I was like, how could they do that? Play off of someone's weakness. And I was like, wait, I'm trying to do the same thing by selling halal meat to religious people. I think the instinct to make $1 off of someone is just innate in humans. Even though I think I'm a good guy and I have good morals,
It is.
but when it comes to my living, or I just don't care.
Yeah.
That's not like I'm trying to rip people off, but I'm gonna play off their weaknesses to make $1.
Now, I agree that's the fundamental incentive in our economy. However, I do have to tell you that there is a kind of new thing happening where some businesses are trying to take a more sustainable approach, and they're actually making a profit as a result. And there's this one carpet company, Interface Carpet Company, run by Ray Anderson, who recently died just a few weeks ago. And this guy had a company that made carpet just like this, and it used to be a very fossil fuel-based production system. But back in the mid-90s, he began to learn about sustainability, and he focused his company on becoming more energy efficient, using more renewable energy, and generally reducing their carbon footprint. And they came up with all of these wonderful ideas for how to do carpet differently. And for example, they would make these carpet tiles, and they used to have these really intricate designs, and they'd print these designs with an ink, and then they'd have to go back later and take out the ones where it was screwed up and all this stuff. And when you laid out the carpet, you had to do it in order. Well, they came up with this new idea called entropy, where instead of an intricate design, it's kind of a random thing like this, just a bunch of different colors. And they used different colored carpet rather than an ink. And because it was random, there were no mistakes. And so you don't have to throw any out because they got messed up. And because it's random, you can also install them in any order and it looks perfect. And so they actually save money on production and installation and no need for ink. And they all do it through this unique idea, a redesign of the product. And as a result of the efforts of the company to reduce their carbon emissions, they got very close to having a zero carbon footprint. They're now taking recycled carpet, making new carpet out of it, making no garbage. They use all their garbage for energy, and they have reduced their carbon footprint and increased their profit margin along the way. Now they dominate the market. And so, and people who buy carpet, most of these corporations now are trying to get a building to be LEED Gold or LEED Platinum. That's the new cool thing with businesses. They want to have buildings that have these LEED qualifications. That's leadership in energy and environmental design. And having carpet that's recycled is going to be part of that. So there's now a demand for beginning to take things in a sustainable way. So here's the thing. Atang, right now, businesses are just focused on profit, and that's legitimate. But if we begin to support businesses because they're sustainable, and we like them because they not only make good products, but they make good products in a way that's sustainable, well then it'll be in your interest to run a little halal restaurant shop and do it in a sustainable way. That is, you're going to try to use renewable energy when you can. You're going to take care of your workers. You're not going to run a sweatshop. And if we do that as consumers, we can make it in your interest to run your business the right way. And then in order to be successful and to make a profit, you'll have to focus on these other issues. Now, right now, most people buy products because they're just a product. They like it and it's a good price. And so long as that's the case, businesses can do whatever they want to the environment and do whatever they want to their workers. But if we begin to take that into account when we buy stuff, that will begin to change things. And I'll be honest with you, I think right now, with the money influencing the political process, we might have a greater impact on our country through what we buy than who we vote on. Because once we vote, they go and they talk to a bunch of lobbyists and they don't even know you, you know. But when you buy stuff, we can make companies go bye-bye, you know. If they don't do it the way we want, they can be history, you know. So I agree with you. Right now, the focus is trying to make a lot of money. And when news corporations do that, that means they want viewers. And if you just talk about silly stuff that makes people laugh, you know, that apparently pulls in a lot of viewers. So watch out, you know, the NBC News, you know, they always end with a fluffy story, you know, and often in the middle. But the other night, Brian Williams actually took 2 or 3 minutes to show 2 bear cubs fighting with each other in a national park. And he actually said we got more video out on the website in case you're interested. Silly news. And there's also this effort to create controversy where it's not there. You know, controversy is much more interesting than non-controversy. And one of the examples they talk about in this book, during the 2008 election, apparently Michelle Obama was interviewed at one point, and she stated that, well, you need to be able to run your family well first before you can go on to run the country. And she was just being interviewed and was talking about her own life and her husband's work. But when they got out in the press, people interpreted that as Michelle Obama making a cut at Hillary Clinton. Since you got to be able to run your family first, Hillary Clinton can't even control her husband. How can she control the country, you know? And that angle got played up on Fox News, and they actually have, you know, this heading underneath it, the claws come out. And it's all in reference to this quote that Michelle Obama gave that really, in the context in which she used it, had nothing whatsoever to do with Hillary Clinton. Yet we can play it up, you know? We can play it up big, and we might get a few more viewers. That seems to be the focus. A couple things that the authors want us to remember. First is that reporters are indeed human. They make mistakes. They don't always have it right. And many reporters admit willingly that they really blew it with the Iraq War. You know, we were told that there are weapons of mass destruction and all this stuff, that there's a connection between Al-Qaeda and what's going on in Iraq. Now we find that there were no weapons of mass destruction, and there wasn't a connection until we went into, brought our military. And none of our reporters were asking those questions. They were just taking notes from the administration. What should I say next? Okay, well, that's okay. Nobody's asking the hard questions. And I'll be honest with you, I don't see them doing any better with this recession. I don't see them doing any better with this recession. The news media is subject to pressures. We need to recognize that. Among these pressures are the government and the multinational corporations that own the news networks. And the news media is driven by profit. This can mean a pressure from advertisers and customers that led Glenn Beck to say bye-bye, you know. When he alienates too many of his advertisers and customers, they can't sustain his program anymore. And if advertisers and customers want more viewers, that might force Anderson to have a silly segment in his news broadcast, just to get more eyes out there. And does anybody listen to talk radio these days? Talk radio.
Like NPR?
What's that?
Like NPR?
That would not be what we were thinking.
Are you talking like Rush Limbaugh kind of stuff?
Talk radio now, I was out driving a couple of weeks ago, and if you flip over the channels, you'll find somebody talking about politics on some of the channels. I'll be honest, the conservatives really seem to dominate talk radio. Progressives seem to dominate cable comedy shows focused on politics. I'm thinking about The Daily Show and The Colbert Report. It's interesting how conservatives can't pull a comedy show off focused on politics. They've tried. It doesn't work that way. It's funny. But a progressive cannot pull off a talk radio.
You can't be sarcastic about like left views. You can be sarcastic about like right views.
Maybe that's it. I wonder.
They want equal opportunities for their employees.
But talk radio seems to be dominated by the conservatives on the right. According to our authors, you'll get some useful information from talk radio, but it's mostly spin, mostly rumors, mostly gossip. And
Isn't that a messed up thing to do? It's like having a title with a question mark, because you can put anything and put a question mark on it, and then in your editorial just like like a little note, like are all Afghans terrorists? Question mark. And then people who don't want to read the article are going to think, hey, they might be terrorists. Like they're just going to flip on, go out with the rest of their day.
well, that kind of ties into the idea that news media is focused by profit. What are they putting on the cover? Something that gets you to buy it and read.
They could say no, they're not terrorists, but you'll see the question mark as a half and half, or like half of them are terrorists. Then that's what I'm going to think is a question mark. No one knows for sure.
In fact, what is that? Is it, it's this week, no, it's Newsweek has recently come out with controversial covers. Did you see that one where they had Kate Middleton and a Photoshop picture of Lady Diana? And Kate Middleton was looking at Lady Diana's dress. Lady Diana's dead.
That's messed up.
Man, it is. And the editor actually had to go on the news to explain what's going on here, and how they're trying to make a connection, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, it was on shrooms.
Well, then, a month or so later, Newsweek comes out with another cover, and I'm sure you remember this, that showed Michelle Bachmann on the front with her eyes like this. And it was like they went out of their way to get a picture of her that made her look crazy. And it was, and Tina Brown is the editor, and they brought her on some news broadcasts, and she tried to make the case that, well, Michelle Bachmann is very passionate, her supporters are very passionate, and we were trying to convey that passion through this picture. Well, you know what they were trying to do with that picture? Is get people to buy the magazine, because Newsweek is dying. They just fired their old editor a few months ago. Tina Brown took it over because she's flashy and hot.
They hired the one from Spider-Man.
They're trying to get somebody to buy this magazine, and nobody really seems to want to anymore. And it used to be, think about it, Newsweek was the name of the magazine, and ostensibly the objective of the magazine was to come out weekly and give you the news for the week. Well, that whole objective has been undercut now that we can get news 24/7 every day of the week. Why are you going to wait till Friday to get the news of the week? You've already got it 5 times. So the whole idea of that magazine has really died. And to try to cover, a bad corporate model They're going with flashy covers now, and we'll see how far that gets them. So with respect to talk radio, according to our authors, it's mostly flash, mostly spin. You'll get some information, but often not what is useful. How about the internet? The internet is obviously a wonderful thing in terms of information. It gives us access to an unprecedented amount of information from all kinds of different perspectives. Now, there increasingly is a lot of bad information out on the internet. Now people can put up a blog and simply write what you want. And sometimes it'll even come up in Google News as an article, you know. And so you can have one reporter from the New York Times who has a PhD and has researched his work, and then your brother Bob, he can write his blog and just put his view, and it comes out along with the guy from the New York Times. So information is only going to be as good as its source, and sometimes the source is not going to be very good. Wikipedia, for example, you know what Wikipedia is?
Free encyclopedia.
Just chime in whenever you want.
Now, this is an encyclopedia created by the users, and you could theoretically go in and alter, you know, the passage for any given term there. And there are records of this happening in the past, particularly during political campaigns. People will get in and write bad things about the opposing candidate, and so you need to be aware that these entries in Wikipedia are written by users. Now, the authors will tell you that it is often a good place to start when you're doing research, because Wikipedia will have pages on things that you don't find in standard encyclopedias. And you'll often find places to go for further research. And that's where the authors suggest that Wikipedia can help you. You can go to Wikipedia, get a general idea on a concept, and then find places to do further research to confirm what you've learned. And if you use Wikipedia like that, it can be a good starting point. But you should never cite Wikipedia in a paper for any class or anything like that. That's admitting that you really don't know what you're doing. You need to check those sources. Finally, what about the information we get from advertising? What about the information we get from advertising? Caitlin?
Oh, well, this is you watch Current TV?
I do.
Yeah, fantastic program. Apparently, it's a couple of younger guys from New York who run it.
Al Gore.
Oh, is Al Gore involved?
He's involved.
I watched something on Current about how Philip Morris is muscling into Indonesia in a big way because of the restricted advertising. There's no restrictions there, and they're like focusing on like getting women and children addicted to cigarettes.
Yeah, they have that one commercial where there's an advertisement right next to a school.
Right.
Cigarettes.
Yeah, right. That was the Indonesia thing. And they went to visit like the smoking baby from the video online.
I love this.
And apparently, like they've got all these ads, like you know, the cigarettes, and then like the by Philip Morris, and this is the new generation, stuff like that.
The new generation.
They're,
We don't care.
deliberately marketing to children, and the Indonesian the cigarette industry employs like 600,000 people. Indonesian government gets like $7 billion in like cigarette tax revenue, so they don't hear that people are dying at a massive.
People make money off of it. Joe Camel was a advertising character that was developed that seemed to be focused on young people. And I think that finally our government prohibited, I don't know who it was that used Joe Camel, but it seemed like they were targeting kids. And you get kids hooked before they can make an adult decision, and you got a user for life, you know, real big issue. Think about how many advertisements you see in the course of a day. I don't think you can fully understand how much advertising is influences you each day. Radio, television,
For sure.
on your clothes, on buildings. They can put a silk screen on cars so that the entire car becomes an ad, and often buses will have a silk screen that enables them to get money from advertising. One writer, this guy, Daniel Bell, argued in this book, Cultural Contradictions of Capitalism. He argued that capitalism, and advertising specifically, killed the Protestant work ethic in our society. And what is the Protestant work ethic? Anybody ever hear the Protestant work ethic in your other classes? What's that?
No, I just heard that. I think it's a salary, isn't it, that you have to work hard to have salvation to go to the...
Yes, in your sociology class?
Yeah.
Absolutely, that's where you'll probably find it. And the idea was that in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, many people were devout in this ideal of the Protestant work ethic. And it meant that you should work hard at your job and that you should save your money. You should save your money. And you should defer your pleasure. And so, I'm going to get your refrigerator, honey. I'm going to put $5 away each month. And 2 years from now, we'll get that refrigerator. And this Protestant work ethic, Daniel Bell argues, actually helped our country grow. Because first, it provided a dependable and hardworking labor force for the corporations that needed it. And you had these car companies, for example, that needed a bunch of workers. And also, since these people saved their money, that money that you save at the bank uses it to invest in businesses. So it created, all these workers saving their money created this large pool of investment capital that banks could use to support successful businesses. So the Protestant work ethic provided not only a valuable labor force, but also investment capital that we could use to invest in businesses. Well, with advertising, Daniel Bell argues, we killed the Protestant work ethic. And it began with some billboards on the side of roads. Then television came along and really changed the whole game. And back in the old days, they would have a TV show that was sponsored by Marlboro, and they'd have the interviewer in the TV show smoking a Marlboro. What's going on? How's it going? So where are we going to... And, you know, they're really pumping these products. And now it gets to the point where it's the Tostitos Sugar Bowl. You know, it used to just be the Sugar Bowl. But now the advertisers put their name right in front, you know, the Tostitos Sugar Bowl.
Sprint halftime report.
Absolutely. They put a name on everything, you know. And as a result, many argue that the Protestant work ethic has been killed. Rather than, you know, saving your money, we go into debt. We put it on the credit
No,
card.
we need that back because I'll see someone, like a guy standing at the bus stop with $300 shoes, not exaggerating, $300 shoes and $200 headphones. At the bus stop, waiting for the next bus to come and he's $300 shoes.
So ads are having an extraordinary influence these days. And the author tells us that in ads, you're going to find two kinds. Those that offer reasons to buy the product, we can assume that they are fair. We cannot assume they are fair and balanced in this, because their intention of these ads is to get you to buy something.
Isn't that
Some ads, excuse me?
I was saying fair and balanced. Isn't that Bill O'Reilly's?
He's joking. He's joking. The ads are not fair and balanced. We have no reason to assume that they are. And there are going to be some that don't even offer reasons to buy the product. They're just going to, you know, make you feel good about the product in some sense. Three categories they talk about: ads that bring out feelings, ads that are endorsed by people you admire, you know, a race car driver or something like that, and ads that depict the product used in situations. Generally, ads are written to sell products, not to provide an argument or not to provide credible information. And the authors suggest that you take that into account when you see them every day, all the time. So that's all the time we have for today. I will see you guys next week. Have a great weekend.